At my son's funeral, his wife threw me out of my own house. I'm Thomas Mitchell. What happened next changed everything. Picture this. Your child just died. You're grieving, and your daughter-in-law looks you in the eye and says, "Stop crying, pack your bags, and get out of my house now." She called me a worthless burden, in front of everyone, at my son's funeral. But here's what Victoria didn't know. The house she was kicking me out of? I built it in 1987. The money she thought she inherited? $850,000 that was always mine. For 8 years, she lived off my generosity while treating me like charity. Instead of arguing, I just walked away. Sometimes silence is the most powerful response of all. If you're new here, hit subscribe. I share stories about standing up to disrespect, and trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Because what Victoria discovered 3 days later taught both of us that assumptions can cost you everything. Let me start from the beginning. The signs were there from the beginning. I just chose to ignore them. When my son David died in that car accident 2 months ago, Victoria immediately took charge. "Don't worry about the arrangements, Tom," she said. "I'll handle everything." What she really meant was, stay out of my way. At the funeral home, she made every decision. The casket, the flowers, even the music. When I suggested David's favorite song, the one we used to play when we built this house together in 1987, she cut me off. "That's too depressing," Victoria said. "We need something more uplifting." I watched her command the room in her $300 black dress, directing everyone like she was the director of this tragic play. And me? I sat in my old gray suit, the one I'd worn to my wife's funeral 2 years earlier, feeling invisible. The second sign came during the reception at our house. My house, technically, though Victoria had been treating it like hers since David's death. She pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Tom, we need to talk about your situation." "My situation?" "You're financially dependent on us now. David was supporting you, and with him gone." She shrugged. "I can't carry that burden." Burden. That word hit harder than expected. "I've been more than generous letting you stay here," she continued. "But this house is mine now. Everything is mine. David left it all to me." I nodded slowly. Victoria saw that nod as defeat. What she didn't see was calculation. She had no idea that David had never owned this house. He lived here, yes. Grew up here, absolutely. But owned it? Never. She also didn't know about the filing cabinet in the basement. 4 drawers of meticulously organized financial records going back 40 years. The CPA in me never threw anything away. Most importantly, she didn't know about the trust. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The funeral guests saw what Victoria wanted them to see. A successful real estate agent taking charge during a family crisis, and an old man who couldn't handle his own affairs. They watched her shake hands and accept condolences like she was the head of the family now. Meanwhile, I sat quietly in David's old recliner, the one I'd bought him for his 16th birthday, and listened to her paint me as the dependent father-in-law. "Tom's having a hard time adjusting," I heard her tell our neighbor Helen Davis. "The poor man doesn't understand finances. David handled everything for him." Helen shot me a sympathetic look. She'd known me for 37 years, since the day I broke ground on this lot. But even she seemed to believe Victoria's version of reality. That's when I realized something important. People see what they expect to see. Victoria expected to see a grieving widower who couldn't manage on his own. So that's what she saw. The old Honda Civic I drove instead of something flashy. The simple clothes I wore instead of expensive suits. The quiet way I handled my grief instead of making a show of it. She mistook humility for helplessness, quiet for weak, generous for desperate. It was an understandable mistake. I'd spent 2 years since my wife Margaret's death living simply. No need for expensive toys or status symbols when you're learning to live alone. David understood that. He respected my choice to downsize my lifestyle. But Victoria? She measured worth by appearance, by volume, by who controlled the conversation. She was about to learn that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who doesn't need to prove anything. As the last guests left that Tuesday evening, Victoria cornered me by the front door. "I meant what I said, Tom. This arrangement isn't working anymore." I looked around the living room I'd painted 3 times over the decades. The hardwood floors I'd installed by hand. The crown molding I'd measured and cut with David when he was 12. "I understand," I said quietly, but Victoria had no idea what I understood, and she definitely had no idea what was coming next. Wednesday morning brought clarity and coffee in equal measure. I sat at my kitchen table, the one Margaret and I had bought at a garage sale in 1986, and made a list. Not of what I was losing, but of what Victoria thought she was gaining. The house, 2,400 square feet of memories on Maple Street in suburban Cleveland. Current market value, according to Victoria's own real estate expertise, $420,000. The life insurance, David's policy through his engineering firm, $150,000. Victoria had already started spending that money in her head. The furniture, everything from Margaret's antique china cabinet to David's collection of engineering textbooks, not valuable to others but priceless to me. My dignity, watching Victoria parade around like she'd inherited a kingdom when she'd actually inherited nothing at all. But here's what really bothered me. It wasn't the money or even the house. It was the erasure. Victoria was systematically removing every trace of the life Margaret and I had built here. She'd already boxed up Margaret's photos from the mantel. David's childhood drawings were gone from the refrigerator. Even my old CPA certificates had disappeared from the den wall. "I'm redecorating," she explained when I asked about Margaret's photos. "David always said this place needed updating." Updating, as if 40 years of memories were outdated software. She gave me 30 days. 30 days to find somewhere else to live on what she assumed was Social Security and nothing else. 30 days to pack up 4 decades and pretend it never happened. The cruelest part? She was doing it all with such confidence, such certainty that she held all the cards. Tuesday afternoon, she'd handed me a printed timeline. Actually printed it out, like I was a tenant getting evicted. "November 15th, she said, pointing to the date circled in red. "That gives you time to find a nice senior community, somewhere more appropriate for your situation." Your situation. There was that phrase again. "I've already looked into a few places," she continued, pulling out brochures like she was doing me a favor. "Sunset Manor has openings. It's only $800 a month for a studio apartment." $800 a month. She expected me to spend my entire Social Security check on rent and somehow survive on nothing else. "What about food?" I asked. "Transportation? Medical bills?" She shrugged. "There are programs for people in your situation. Food stamps, Medicaid. The government takes care of senior citizens." The government. Like I was some charity case who'd never contributed anything to society. That's when I realized Victoria didn't just want me gone. She wanted me grateful for the opportunity to leave. She wanted me to thank her for 30 days instead of 0. To appreciate her generosity in not calling the police to have me removed immediately. To accept that this was simply how things worked now that David was gone. But Wednesday morning, sitting with my coffee and my list, I had a different realization. Victoria had made one critical assumption, that David owned everything she was claiming. She'd been married to him for 8 years. She'd lived in this house for 8 years. She'd probably never seen a deed or a mortgage statement or any document that proved ownership of anything. Why would she? David handled the finances, just like his mother and I had taught him. The man takes care of the money. Old-fashioned maybe, but it worked for us. Except David had never actually handled my finances. He'd helped me around the house, sure. Brought groceries when I needed them. Drove me to doctor appointments after Margaret died. But the money? The investments? The property? That was always mine to manage. Victoria saw David's helpfulness and assumed dependency. She saw my gratitude and assumed obligation. She saw 2 years of quiet grief and assumed defeat. If I said nothing, if I just packed my bags and shuffled off to Sunset Manor like a good little senior citizen, what message would that send? That bullies win. That volume beats truth. That if you're loud enough and confident enough, you can rewrite history and steal someone's life. That respect is optional when you're dealing with old people. That my 40 years of marriage to Margaret meant nothing. That the house we built together was just bricks and wood. That the son we raised here could be forgotten as easily as photos removed from a mantel. The stakes weren't just financial. They were existential. But I had something Victoria didn't know about. Something that would change everything. I just needed to find the right moment to use it. And that moment was coming sooner than she thought. Thursday morning, Victoria let herself into my house with David's key. I was having breakfast when I heard the front door open. No knock, no good morning. She walked in like she owned the place, which, in her mind, she did. "Tom, we need to talk," she announced, marching into the kitchen with a manila folder under her arm. "About what?" "Your finances." She sat down across from me without being invited. "I've been thinking about your situation, and I need to understand exactly what David was covering for you." I took a sip of coffee. "Such as?" "The utilities, the property taxes, the insurance." She opened her folder and pulled out a legal pad covered in her handwriting. David never told me the exact amounts, but I need to know so I can budget properly. Budget for what? For taking over those payments, obviously. She looked at me like I was slow. Until you move out, I'll have to cover everything David was covering for you. I set down my coffee cup. And what exactly do you think David was covering? Everything. The mortgage, the taxes, the electric bill. You're on a fixed income, Tom. Social Security doesn't stretch that far. Is that what David told you? Victoria's pen stopped moving. What do you mean? I mean, did David specifically tell you he was paying my bills? He didn't have to tell me. It's obvious. She gestured around the kitchen. How else could you afford to live here? This house is worth over $400,000. And how do you know what it's worth? I'm a real estate agent, Tom. I know property values in this neighborhood. But you've never seen the deed. The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's confident expression flickered for just a moment. I don't need to see the deed. David inherited this house when your wife died. Did he? Of course he did. Who else would get it? I stood up slowly and walked to the sink, rinsing my coffee cup with deliberate care. You know, Victoria, you've made a lot of assumptions about my finances. They're not assumptions. They're facts. Really? What other facts do you have? She consulted her legal pad. David told me you never contributed a dime to this house. I turned around. Is that what David told you? Yes. Interesting. Because I built this house in 1987, paid cash for the lot, hired the contractors, supervised every day of construction. Victoria's face tightened. That was 37 years ago. Things change. Some things, not ownership. Look, Tom, I know this is hard for you. Losing David, having to face reality about your financial situation, but denial won't help. What denial? Pretending you're not dependent on family charity. The word charity landed like a slap. I dried my hands on the dish towel, taking my time. Victoria, let me ask you something. What? In 8 years of marriage, did David ever show you a mortgage statement? We kept our finances separate. Did he ever mention making house payments? We didn't discuss every detail of his expenses. Did you ever see him write a check for property taxes? Her silence was answer enough. Here's what I think happened, I said, leaning against the counter. David helped me around the house, picked up groceries, did some yard work, and you assumed that meant he was supporting me financially. Because that's what it looked like. Appearances can be deceiving. Victoria stood up, clearly frustrated. Fine, show me the deed then. Prove you own this house. I don't have to prove anything to you. Yes, you do, because I'm David's widow and I inherited everything. Did you? Stop answering questions with questions. Stop making assumptions. We stared at each other across the kitchen. Victoria's jaw was tight, her real estate agent composure cracking. You have until November 15th, she said finally. After that, I'm changing the locks. We'll see about that. She gathered her papers and headed for the door. We'll see about what? But I just smiled and started loading the dishwasher. Some conversations are better finished with lawyers present. Friday afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went down to the basement. The basement had always been my sanctuary. Margaret used to joke that I was like a squirrel down there, storing away every document and receipt like they were acorns for winter. You never know when you'll need proof of something, I'd tell her. She'd roll her eyes and remind me that normal people didn't keep 40 years of bank statements. But I wasn't normal people. I was a CPA who'd learned early that paper trails tell stories, and stories protect you when memories fail or people lie. The filing cabinet stood exactly where I'd left it, 4 drawers of meticulous organization, each drawer labeled by decade, each file folder labeled by category, each document filed chronologically. It was beautiful in its own way. I pulled out the bottom drawer first, 1980s, the decade that changed everything. Inside, I found the folder I was looking for. Real estate, 447 Maple Street. Yes, 447. The house number Victoria thought she now owned. The first document was the original land purchase agreement, March 12, 1987. Thomas Mitchell, buyer. $43,000 for the lot. The second document was the construction contract, Mitchell & Sons Building Company. No relation to me, just a coincidence of names. $78,000 for a custom colonial. The third document was the most important, the original deed, recorded March 15, 1987. Owner, Thomas Mitchell, no cosigner, no joint ownership, no mortgage. I'd paid cash for everything. Victoria had no idea, of course. She'd been 4 years old in 1987, probably learning to tie her shoes while I was learning to read blueprints. But there was more in that folder. Much more. Insurance policies, property tax receipts, utility connection agreements, all in my name, all paid by me, all proving continuous ownership for 37 years. David's name appeared nowhere in any of these documents. I pulled out the second drawer. 1990s. More of the same. Property taxes paid annually by Thomas Mitchell. Insurance premiums paid quarterly by Thomas Mitchell. Even the landscaping receipts were in my name. The 2000s drawer told the same story, and the 2010 S, and the most recent file from 2024. But the real surprise was in the very back of the bottom drawer, in a folder labeled Trust Documents. Private. This was the folder Victoria definitely didn't know about. Inside were papers that would change everything, documents that told a story she couldn't imagine. The first paper was a trust agreement, dated June 15, 1985, before David was even born. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. The second paper was a bank statement from First National Bank of Ohio. Current balance as of October 31, 2024, $853,412. The third paper was a list of trust beneficiaries. David's name was there, yes, but not as an inheritor, as a beneficiary during his lifetime, with specific terms and conditions. Terms and conditions that Victoria had never bothered to ask about. The trust was complicated, the way these things always are. But the basic structure was simple. Margaret and I were the original trustees. After Margaret's death, I became the sole trustee. David received monthly allowances for education, housing assistance, and family support. But ownership? That always remained with the trust, which meant it remained with me. David had lived comfortably because I made sure he lived comfortably. The engineering degree I helped pay for, the wedding I helped fund, the various investments and opportunities that came his way. All of it flowed from this trust. All of it remained under my control. Victoria saw David's comfortable lifestyle and assumed he was independently wealthy. She saw his generosity toward me and assumed it came from his own earnings. She never imagined that the money flowing from David to me was actually my own money flowing back home. It's funny how assumptions work. You see what fits your expectations and ignore what doesn't. Victoria expected successful young couples to support their aging parents. So when she saw David helping me, she assumed dependency. She never considered the possibility that I was helping him. But there was one more document in that folder. One that would matter most when the time came for truth-telling. David's life insurance policy. $150,000, just like Victoria said. But the beneficiary wasn't Victoria. The beneficiary was the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust, which meant the beneficiary was me. Victoria had been spending money that was never hers to begin with, making plans with resources that belonged to someone else, building a future on a foundation that didn't exist. I closed the filing cabinet and headed back upstairs. In the kitchen, I made myself a sandwich and thought about timing. Victoria had given me until November 15th to move out. Today was November 1st. That gave me exactly 2 weeks to decide how to handle this situation. I could call her right now, explain the truth, show her the documents, watch her world collapse in real time. Or I could wait. Let her keep making assumptions. Let her dig the hole deeper. Let her learn the lesson the hard way. As I ate my sandwich, I remembered something my old business partner used to say. Tom, sometimes the best negotiation strategy is letting the other guy talk himself into a corner. Victoria was definitely talking herself into a corner. The question was, how deep did I want to let her dig before I stopped her? I looked around the kitchen I'd designed 37 years ago. The cabinets I'd chosen, the countertops I'd installed, the windows I'd measured and ordered, my house, my trust, my choice. Victoria was about to learn that respect isn't negotiable, but first she needed to finish digging. Sunday morning brought the worst of Victoria. I was getting ready for church when she arrived with 3 of her real estate agent friends. She'd invited them for what she called a consultation about the house's potential. I heard them before I saw them. Victoria's voice carrying through the front door. This place has incredible bones, but the decor is so outdated. Classic old person style, you know? They walked through my house like it was already theirs. Oh my God, Victoria, this crown molding is gorgeous, said a blonde woman in expensive boots. Original? From 1987, Victoria replied. Tom built this place, but he has no eye for modern design. Look at this wallpaper, and that furniture. It's like a museum. I stood at the top of the stairs listening to them catalog my life's work like it was a garage sale. The bones are definitely there, said another woman. But you'll need to gut the kitchen. Those cabinets are so 80s. Already planning on it, Victoria said. Tom will be moving to a senior community soon, so I'll have full control over renovations. Full control. Over my kitchen. The one Margaret and I had planned together for 6 months. I came downstairs wearing my church clothes. 3 women I'd never met were standing in my living room taking photos. Tom! Victoria's voice was artificially bright. Perfect timing. I want you to meet some colleagues. She introduced them like I was a curiosity. This is Tom, David's father. He's the original owner, but he's transitioning to a more suitable living situation. Transitioning. Like I was a job change. Mr. Mitchell, said the blonde one, your house has such character. You must have put a lot of work into it. Some, I said. Victoria tells us you're moving to Sunset Manor. That's such a nice facility. I looked at Victoria. Is that what I'm doing? We discussed this, Tom, November 15th, remember? I remember you discussing it. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. The real estate agents exchanged glances. Well, said the blonde one, we should probably let you get to church. Actually, Victoria said, Tom, while everyone's here, maybe you could tell them about the maintenance issues, the roof leak, the furnace problems? There was no roof leak. The furnace was 2 years old. I'm not aware of any maintenance issues, I said carefully. Tom, you know the upstairs bathroom faucet drips, and the basement gets damp in the spring. The faucet needs a 50-cent washer. The basement has been dry for 20 years. Victoria's smile tightened. Tom's very attached to this place. Sometimes he doesn't see problems that are obvious to others. Problems like what? I asked. Like the fact that you can't afford to maintain a house this size anymore. The room went quiet. Even the real estate agents looked uncomfortable. Can't afford it? I asked. Tom, we've been through this. Your Social Security barely covers basic living expenses. And you know this how? Because I'm not blind. You drive a 15-year-old Honda. You shop with coupons. You haven't updated anything in this house since the Clinton administration. One of the agents cleared her throat. Maybe we should reschedule this tour? No, it's fine, Victoria said. Tom understands this situation. He's had 2 years to adjust to reality since Margaret died. What reality is that? I asked. That you're a 70-year-old man on a fixed income who can't handle a 2,400 square foot house anymore. 70? 68? Whatever. The point is you're making assumptions about my finances. They're not assumptions, Tom. They're observations. Observations about what? About the fact that you've been living off David's generosity for 2 years, and now that David's gone, you need to face reality. The words hung in the air like tear gas. The 3 real estate agents were actively looking for exits. David's generosity, I repeated. Yes, David paid your property taxes. David covered your utilities. David made sure you had groceries and medical care. Did he? You know he did. And you know this because I was married to him. I saw him writing the checks. What checks? Victoria's face flushed. The checks for your expenses. Did you see him write checks to the county for property taxes? He handled those things online. Did you see him pay my electric bill? He transferred money to your account. Did you ever see bank statements showing these transfers? We kept our finances separate, so you never actually saw any of these payments? The blonde agent stepped forward. You know what, Victoria? This feels like a family discussion. Maybe we should give you some privacy. No, Victoria said sharply. This needs to be said. Tom, you cannot keep living in denial about your financial situation. What denial? The denial that you're anything other than a burden. The word echoed through the room. Even Victoria seemed surprised she'd said it out loud. A burden, I said quietly. I'm sorry, but yes, you're a burden. You have been since Margaret died. David was too kind to say it, but someone has to. Too kind to say what? That supporting you was bankrupting him. Bankrupting him. Yes, the property taxes alone are $8,000 a year. Add utilities, maintenance, your medical expenses. She was building steam now, letting 2 months of frustration pour out. David spent $40,000 last year keeping you afloat. $40,000. At least. And now he's gone and I'm supposed to pick up that burden? I have my own life to think about. The real estate agents were edging toward the door. So you're throwing me out, I said. I'm giving you a month to find appropriate housing. That's more generous than most people would be. Generous. Yes, generous. Because frankly, Tom, you never contributed anything to David's success. He built his own life, earned his own money, bought his own house. This house. Yes, this house. David inherited it from Margaret, and now I inherit it from David. That's how inheritance works. I nodded slowly. I see. Good. Finally. Victoria? What? You might want to check your facts before making statements like that in front of witnesses. She laughed. What facts? Tom, I'm a real estate professional. I know how property ownership works. Do you? Better than you do, apparently. I looked at the three women by the door. They were witnessing something they definitely hadn't signed up for. Ladies, I said, you might want to ask Victoria to show you the deed to this house before you start planning renovations. Victoria's face went white. Tom, don't what? Don't tell the truth? But I'd said enough. Sometimes the best revenge is letting people hang themselves with their own words. Enjoy your tour, I said, and headed for the front door. I had a lawyer to call. Monday morning, I sat in attorney Margaret Collins' office with 3 manila folders on the mahogany desk between us. Margaret Collins? No relation to my late wife, just another one of life's small coincidences, had been handling my legal affairs for 20 years. She knew exactly what those folders contained. Tom, she said, adjusting her reading glasses, I have to ask, are you sure you want to do this? I'm sure. Because once we start this process, there's no taking it back. Victoria will know everything. Good. Margaret opened the first folder. Let's review what we have. The original deed to 447 Maple Street lay on top. Thomas Mitchell, sole owner, recorded March 15, 1987. No co-signers, Margaret noted. No joint ownership. No mortgage. You paid cash for the land and construction. Correct. She opened the second folder. Property tax records for 37 years. All paid by you from your accounts. Correct. Insurance policies, utility bills, maintenance contracts, all in your name. Correct. She opened the third folder. And this is the big one. The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. The trust documents were thick, complex, full of legal language that took years to develop and decades to fund. Current balance? Margaret asked, though she already knew. $853,412 as of last Friday. And David's status in the trust? Beneficiary during his lifetime, never a trustee, never an owner. Margaret leaned back in her leather chair. Tom, this is a substantial estate. Victoria had no idea? None. And David never told her about the trust structure? David was a good son, but he wasn't detail-oriented about finances. He knew I helped him when he needed help. He probably never thought to explain where the money came from. So Victoria assumed that David was supporting me instead of the other way around. Margaret shook her head. It's understandable, I suppose. Young couples don't usually have trust this size backing them up. The irony is beautiful, I said. Victoria kicked me out of my own house using my own money to threaten me. How so? David's life insurance, $150,000. She's been making plans with that money for 2 months. But the beneficiary is the trust, which means the beneficiary is me. Margaret pulled out a calculator. So let me make sure I understand. Victoria thinks she inherited a $420,000 house and $150,000 in life insurance. That's right. But actually she inherited nothing. The house belongs to you, and the insurance money goes to your trust. That's right. And she's been treating you like a charity case while planning to spend nearly $600,000 that was never hers. That's right. Margaret was quiet for a moment, processing the situation. Tom, I have to ask, why did you let this go on for 2 months? Why didn't you correct her assumptions immediately? I thought about that Sunday morning scene. Victoria calling me a burden in front of strangers. The casual cruelty of it. Because I wanted to see how far she'd go. And she went pretty far. Margaret nodded. What do you want to do now? I want to establish clear boundaries. Legal boundaries? All kinds of boundaries. She pulled out a legal pad. Talk to me. First, I want the insurance claim processed immediately. The money belongs to the trust, not to Victoria. Done. That's straightforward. Second, I want Victoria served with formal notice that she's a tenant in my house, not an owner. Also straightforward. How much notice? 30 days. The same time frame she gave me. Margaret smiled slightly. Poetic justice. Third, I want her to understand exactly what David's relationship to the trust was, so she can't claim ignorance going forward. We can provide complete documentation. And fourth, I paused, I want witnesses present when we have this conversation. Witnesses? The same real estate agents who heard her call me a burden yesterday. They should hear the truth too. Margaret set down her pen. Tom, that feels like public humiliation. No, public humiliation is what Victoria did to me. This is public education. There's a difference? Victoria humiliated me to make herself feel powerful. I'm educating people to prevent future misunderstandings. Margaret considered this. The real estate agents aren't necessary for the legal process, but they're necessary for the social process. Explain. Victoria spent 2 months telling people that I'm a broke old man living off family charity. Those people deserve to know the truth. And Victoria deserves to hear that truth in front of the same people she lied to. Exactly. Margaret made notes on her legal pad. When do you want to do this? Tomorrow. Give Victoria 24 hours to enjoy her assumptions. And if she refuses to meet, then we serve the papers without explanation and let her figure it out. Margaret pulled out her calendar. I can have everything ready by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Perfect. Where do you want to meet? Victoria's real estate office, where her colleagues can see what respect looks like. Margaret looked up from her calendar. Tom, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I've seen a lot of family disputes. This isn't about the money, is it? No, it's about the disrespect. It's about boundaries. Victoria needs to learn that you can't treat people badly just because you think they're powerless. And if she'd been respectful from the beginning, then we'd be having a different conversation. I would have explained the situation privately and helped her transition to independence. But she wasn't respectful. She was cruel. There's a difference between grief and cruelty. Margaret closed the folders. I'll make the calls this afternoon. Thank you. Tom? Yes? For what it's worth, I think David would be proud of how you're handling this. I stood up and shook her hand. David taught me something important. What's that? That quiet strength beats loud ignorance every time. He was a smart boy. He learned from the best teacher. Margaret? No, life. Life taught him that respect is earned, not inherited. As I left the law office, I thought about Victoria's timeline. She'd given me until November 15th to move out. Tomorrow was November 5th. She was about to learn that some deadlines cut both ways, and some assumptions cost more than you can afford to pay. The quiet man was about to speak up, and when quiet men finally speak, smart people listen. Victoria was about to find out exactly how smart she really was. Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., Margaret Collins and I walked into Premier Realty on Main Street. Victoria was at her desk, showing house photos to a young couple. She looked up when we entered, and her face went from professional smile to confusion to something approaching alarm. Tom? What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said calmly. Privately. The young couple looked between us, sensing tension. I'm with clients, Victoria said, her real estate agent composure kicking in. Can this wait? No, Margaret Collins said, stepping forward. I'm Margaret Collins, attorney at law. We need to discuss some urgent legal matters regarding your late husband's estate. The words attorney and legal matters had an immediate effect. The young couple exchanged glances. Maybe we should reschedule, the husband said. No, that's fine, Victoria said quickly. Tom, can you just wait in the conference room? I'll be right there. Actually, Margaret said, I think your colleagues should hear this too. Victoria's face went pale. My colleagues? The 3 ladies from Sunday. I believe they're planning renovations based on some assumptions that need to be corrected. Around the office, conversation slowed. Other agents pretended to work while clearly listening. Tom, what is this about? Victoria's voice had an edge now. It's about the house, I said simply. We already discussed the house. No, you discussed the house. I listened. Victoria's client couple was backing toward the door. We'll definitely call to reschedule, the wife said. Wait, Victoria called after them, but they were already gone. The blonde agent from Sunday, Jessica, I think her name was, approached cautiously. Victoria, is everything okay? Everything's fine, Victoria said tightly. Tom's just having some difficulty accepting his new living situation. Actually, Margaret said, opening her briefcase, Tom's having difficulty accepting his old living situation. What does that mean? Margaret pulled out the first folder. It means we need to clarify some misconceptions about property ownership. There are no misconceptions, Victoria said. I inherited David's house. What house is that? Margaret asked. 447 Maple Street. And you have documentation of this inheritance? David's will left his personal property to you, yes. His car, his clothing, his personal effects, and his house. David didn't own a house. The words dropped into the office like stones into still water. Every conversation stopped. "What do you mean he didn't own a house?" Victoria asked. Margaret opened the folder and pulled out the deed. 447 Maple Street is owned by Thomas Mitchell. Purchased March 15th, 1987. No co-signers, no joint ownership, no mortgage. That's impossible. Here's the deed. Victoria snatched the paper and read it. Her face went from pale to white. "This has to be wrong," she said. "David inherited this house when Margaret died." "Margaret Mitchell owned no property," Margaret Collins said. "Everything was purchased by Thomas Mitchell before their marriage. But David lived there his whole life, as Tom's son, in Tom's house." Jessica and the other agents were drawing closer now, fascinated despite themselves. "I don't understand," Victoria said. "David paid all the bills, the taxes, the utilities, everything." "No," I said quietly. "David helped me around the house. I paid all the bills." "That's not true." Margaret pulled out the second folder. "Property tax records for 37 years, all paid by Thomas Mitchell. Insurance policies," she continued, pulling out papers, "all in Thomas Mitchell's name. Utility bills, bank records, maintenance contracts, all Thomas Mitchell." Victoria stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "David had money, good money. He was an engineer." "David was comfortable because Tom made sure he was comfortable," Margaret said. "What does that mean?" Margaret pulled out the third folder. "The Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust. Current balance, $853,412. The office was completely silent now. "David was a beneficiary of the trust during his lifetime," Margaret continued. "Tom provided financial support for David's education, his wedding, his various needs." "You're saying Tom was supporting David?" "I'm saying Tom was supporting his son from his own resources." Victoria sank into her desk chair. "But David told me he was helping Tom financially." "David was helping Tom practically. Groceries, rides to appointments, yard work. Tom was helping David financially." "The life insurance," Victoria said suddenly. "David's life insurance, that's mine." Margaret pulled out another paper. "The beneficiary of David's life insurance policy is the Thomas and Margaret Mitchell Family Trust." "No." "Yes." "That money is mine." "That money belongs to Tom." Victoria looked around the office. Every agent was staring at her. The woman who'd been so confident Sunday morning, so certain of her inheritance, so dismissive of the old man's protests. "Tom," she said, her voice small now, "I didn't know. You didn't ask. You could have told me. You could have asked respectfully." Margaret closed the folders. "Victoria, you have 30 days to find alternative housing arrangements." 30 days? The same timeline you gave Tom. "But where will I go?" "That's not Tom's concern anymore," Margaret said. "You're a capable adult with a career. I'm sure you'll figure something out." Victoria looked at me with something I'd never seen from her before. Respect. "Tom, I'm sorry. I made assumptions." "Yes, you did. Can we work something out? Some kind of arrangement?" I considered the question. Around us, the real estate office was perfectly quiet. "Victoria, respect isn't negotiable. It never was. I understand that now. Do you?" "Yes." "Good. That's the first step toward earning it back." Margaret and I headed for the door. "Tom," Victoria called after me. "What happens now?" I turned back. "Now you learn what I've always known." "What's that?" "That quiet people aren't weak people. We're just selective about when we use our voices." And with that, we left. The silence behind us spoke volumes. By Thursday morning, the entire story had spread through Cleveland's suburban real estate community like wildfire. I knew this because Helen Davis, my neighbor for 37 years, brought me coffee and the latest gossip. "Tom, you should have seen Victoria at the grocery store yesterday," Helen said, settling into Margaret's old chair at my kitchen table. "She looked like she'd seen a ghost." "How so?" "Well, for starters, she was shopping in the clearance section. Victoria, who never bought anything that wasn't name brand." Helen stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "And she was alone. Usually she's got those real estate friends of hers trailing behind like she's some kind of celebrity. Maybe they were busy. Or maybe they're keeping their distance now that the truth is out." Helen had always been perceptive about social dynamics. "What truth is that?" I asked, though I already knew. "That she spent 2 months treating you like a charity case while planning to spend money that was never hers." Helen shook her head. "People are talking, Tom, and not in a good way for Victoria." "What are they saying?" "That she showed poor judgment." that she made assumptions about finances without doing her homework. And in real estate, homework matters. Exactly. Her broker called her in for a meeting yesterday afternoon. This was news to me. How do you know that? Because my sister's daughter works at Premier Realty. She said the whole office was buzzing about what happened Tuesday morning. Helen leaned forward conspiratorially. Apparently, 3 different clients have already asked to be transferred to other agents. Why? Because if Victoria can't figure out who owns a house she's been living in for 8 years, how can she be trusted with their real estate transactions? I hadn't considered that angle, but it made sense. Real estate was built on trust and competence. Victoria had publicly demonstrated a lack of both. There's more, Helen continued. You know that young couple she was meeting with when you showed up? Vaguely. They posted about it on social media. Something about dodging a bullet with an agent who doesn't understand property law. They posted about it? With photos of the office and everything? It's gotten hundreds of likes. The ripple effects were spreading faster than I'd anticipated. My phone rang. Margaret Collins. Tom, we have some developments. Good or bad? Depends on your perspective. Victoria's attorney called this morning. She hired an attorney? Apparently. He wanted to discuss a settlement. What kind of settlement? Victoria would like to stay in the house for 6 months instead of 30 days. She's offering to pay rent. How much rent? $2,000 a month. I almost laughed. For a house worth $420,000? Market rent would be closer to $3,000, yes? What did you tell him? That we'd consider reasonable offers. And what's reasonable? $3,500 a month, first and last month in advance, plus a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent. So $10,500 up front? Correct. If she wants to stay, she pays market rate like any other tenant. Can she afford that? That's not our problem. But her attorney seemed to think it might be challenging given her current circumstances. After I hung up, Helen was studying my face. Victoria wants to stay? She asked. She wants to pay below market rent to stay. And you said? I said she can pay market rent like anyone else. Helen nodded approvingly. Fair is fair. Friday afternoon brought another visitor, David's old college friend, Mike Thompson. Tom, I owe you an apology, he said at my front door. For what? For believing Victoria's version of things. She told everyone that David was supporting you financially. And you believed her. I did. And I'm sorry. I should have known better. Mike shifted uncomfortably. The thing is, David always talked about how proud he was of your success. How you'd built this house, how you'd managed your investments, how you'd taught him about financial responsibility. So, why did you believe Victoria? Because it fit what I expected to see. Old man, dead wife, grown son helping out. It seemed natural. Assumptions again. Yeah, and I'm not the only one. A lot of David's friends made the same assumption. And now? Now we're all feeling pretty stupid. And we're wondering what else Victoria might have misrepresented about David. That was an interesting development. Victoria's credibility was collapsing across multiple social circles. Saturday morning, Margaret Collins called with the final update. Victoria's attorney called back, she said. She can't afford the rent. So she's moving out? She's moving out. But there's something else. What? She's also leaving Premier Realty. Voluntarily? Let's call it mutually agreed upon. So Victoria was losing her house and her job in the same week. Tom, I have to ask, do you feel bad about any of this? I looked around my kitchen, the one Margaret and I had designed together, the one Victoria had planned to gut and renovate. Margaret, Victoria made choices. She chose to be cruel instead of kind. She chose assumptions instead of questions. She chose to humiliate me in front of strangers. And now she's facing consequences. Natural consequences. I didn't fire her from her job. Her clients did that by requesting other agents. Because they lost confidence in her judgment. Exactly. This isn't revenge, this is accountability. And Victoria? Victoria is learning that actions have consequences. It's a lesson she should have learned years ago. Sunday morning, I sat in church thinking about forgiveness and boundaries. They weren't opposite things, I realized. They were complementary. I could forgive Victoria for her assumptions and still maintain boundaries about respect. I could forgive her cruelty and still expect her to face the natural consequences of her choices. Forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing had happened. It meant accepting what had happened and moving forward with wisdom. Victoria was moving out next weekend, and I was moving forward with a new understanding of my own quiet power. Sometimes the best lesson you can teach someone is to let them teach themselves.
3 weeks later, I sat in my living room reading the Sunday paper when the doorbell rang. Victoria stood on my porch with a moving box in her hands. "Hi, Tom." "Victoria. I found some things that belong to you. Photo albums from when David was little. Some of Margaret's recipe cards." I opened the door wider. "Come in." She set the box on the coffee table and looked around the room she'd planned to renovate. "It looks the same," she said.
Why would it look different? I don't know, I guess I thought you might change things after everything. Some things don't need changing. We sat in the quiet for a moment. "Tom, I owe you more than an apology. You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do. I treated you terribly. I made assumptions about your life, your finances, your worth. I was cruel when I should have been grateful. And now? Now I understand something I should have understood from the beginning." "What's that?" "That David learned his values from someone. His kindness, his generosity, his quiet strength. He learned all of that from you." I nodded. "David was a good son." "He was. And you were a good father. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy making assumptions." "We all make assumptions, Victoria. The question is, what we do when we learn we're wrong. I'm trying to learn from this." "Good. I found a job in Columbus. Fresh start, new city. Maybe I can do better there." "I hope you can." She stood to leave, then turned back. "Tom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." If I'd been respectful from the beginning, if I'd asked questions instead of making demands, would things have been different? I thought about that. Probably. I would have helped you transition to independence, given you time to find your feet. We might have found a way to honor David's memory together. Instead of fighting over it. Victoria picked up her purse. "I guess respect really isn't negotiable, is it?" "No, it's not." "Thank you for teaching me that." After she left, I opened the box she'd brought. David's baby pictures, Margaret's handwritten recipes, small treasures that had somehow ended up in the wrong hands. I thought about the past 3 months. The funeral, the confrontation, the legal resolution, the natural consequences. Victoria had learned an expensive lesson about assumptions and respect. But I'd learned something too. I'd learned that quiet strength doesn't mean silent acceptance of disrespect. I'd learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're guidelines for healthy relationships. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and let people deal with the consequences of their own choices. David would have been proud of that lesson. Margaret would have approved of the quiet way I'd handled it. And me? I was at peace. If you're watching this and you've ever been underestimated because of your age, your quiet nature, or your humble lifestyle, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to remind someone that respect isn't inherited, it's earned? Sometimes the best response to disrespect is simply proving them wrong. And sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who don't need to prove anything at all. Until next time, remember, quiet doesn't mean weak. It just means selective.